So we've talked about grief before, but what we're talking about today is grieving what never was. That's the title of it. It's about, there is a song in South Pacific. Some of you are too young to remember South Pacific, but there was a song in there, and it says, if you never have a dream, you'll never have a dream come true. So, we all need to have dreams and goals and, something to look forward to in the future. And sometimes those things don't pan out. They really don't. And so, it's about the talk today is about grieving those things. The losses that you really never had. You can't really lose something that you never had, but it's about losing a dream, whatever that dream, is. And it's mourning the loss of it. I'll give you an example of one of the things is, and it's a small thing. Well, it's not small, but I'm kind of, y'all probably don't know this, but I'm kind of probably a grandiose person, and when I dream really big. So when I started Shades, I had the idea that, we'd put in a small center, and then we would duplicate it all over the United States until we had, one in every region. Well, I'll tell you, if you've never run a business or if you've never run a treatment center, you get bogged down in the daily work, and just, keeping the center open and getting people to come to treatment and all that. And so you can dream big, and I've always been a pretty big dreamer. And then when those dreams change, we need to grieve what really never happened. It's looks like my lipstick's going up right there, but anyway, I'll move my lips so I'll show some that. All right. When in recovery, when we get really honest and start looking at ourselves, we really see how sometimes those dreams were just a fantasy. It's something that we make up in our head. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? Shake your head if you know what I'm talking about. A fantasy. What I was, I had a fantasy. I was always overweight from the time I was, 4 years old until I was a young adult and I started losing weight. I'm talking about morbidly obese as a child. And so my dream, my fantasy was being thin like those little girls in junior high school. Now, I was in the era where we wore poodle skirts with cans. Y'all probably, any of y'all remember, probably Meg, thank you for saving me. Yeah, some of you remember. And bobby socks with saddle Oxfords. Well, when you are a 215-pound teenager, poodle skirts with cans and saddle Oxfords are, the most becoming thing to wear. So I had a dream, a vision that I was going to be like one of those little cheerleaders. Well, in order to be like one of those little cheerleaders, I had to quit the overeating. And I could connect the dots. I knew, that I needed to lose the weight. And that in itself was a fantasy that one day I was going to be thin. And one day when I was going to be thin, I was going to do this and something else, And so I put off my life many times because I wasn't thin enough. I didn't look good enough. And so in recovery, when that grief starts surfacing, for instance, maybe you plan to have children. Now that's a big one. And maybe you were not able to have children. That is a grief, a huge grief. And so that's what we want to see, to look at why recovery really matters. It really matters if we can, because if we deny the grief that we're going through, what happens is we can get back. Denying grief. Grief is painful. If y'all have ever gone through grief, shake your head yes. And has it been painful? Painful. But I'll tell you, if we don't go through the grief and get past it and stay stuck in it, that's dangerous, dangerous, dangerous for an addict of any sort, for us to stay stuck in those feelings. And so, we're not so unique and different, and yes, we are. Addicts are unique and different. I think God handpicked all of us to be an addict so we could get in recovery, and I don't know, but anyway, it's not easy being an addict, but recovery is so wonderful once we get there. So one of the things is, how we try to numb out the denial of the things that didn't happen. In our addiction, we do things, we shoot ourselves in the foot a lot of times, and we don't get the things in life that a lot of other people do. Like I didn't finish high school, and so I had to finish high school in my adult life in order to go to college. I had to finish high school. So that was a lost dream. That was a lost dream, and I had to grieve that not finishing school. And I could put blame. I could put blame on, well, my mother didn't want me to go to school. She wanted me to stay home with her. And what good does the blame do? None. So what happens if we don't address that unresolved grief in areas of things that we, didn't get or wanted or had dreams of? What happens is we set ourselves up for the possibility of relapse, or if we don't relapse in our addiction, we can really get a good case of codependency going, and that is another addiction within itself, that being addicted to other people. And then what we do is we can get into a lot of control. I always say at Shades, what we treat is the big C. We treat control. We get people, I've never had a client yet that didn't suffer from some form of control. Because when we're addicts, we don't feel like we can have control of anything, so we try to control everything, and so control or busyness or people pleasing. And so it's important to face the type of grief is that, what you're grieving, or what those unmet dreams or goals that you didn't, have. When you get them identified, if you don't begin to grieve them, that's what we call being stuck in emotions. And so recovery is about having that emotional sobriety. You can't have emotional sobriety while you're using a substance. Y'all all agree with that? So you have to get clean in an addiction before we can have emotional sobriety. And in that emotional sobriety, and as we work the steps, and as we go to meetings, and as we talk to others, I'll tell you, more things will surface in your life about things that never really happened the way that you wanted them to happen. For instance, maybe a parent didn't love you the way you felt like you needed to be loved. Maybe you were not taken care of. Maybe you had a lot of neglect, abandonment. Maybe they didn't protect you. That is solid things that happens to us, and those things have to be grieved. It needs to be grieved what we didn't get, what we didn't receive in childhood. And this is why we really support those of us who are ACOAs, adult children of alcoholics, in sobriety. Don't do it early in sobriety. Get sober first around whatever addiction you've got, and then look at ACOA, those characteristics of an adult child of an alcoholic. If you are one and you read those characteristics, I believe you're going to find yourself there. And so, being an adult child of an alcoholic, there's a lot to grieve, because there's failed promises. Our parents would try to would make promises that they couldn't keep, and they really intended to. They really intended to, but in their addiction they couldn't. And so, one of the things that, and I know today, it affected our children, in that I was a stay-at-home mom. I focused on home and kids and school activities because my mother didn't. So I was going to do everything I was going to give my kids everything that I didn't get. And so one of the things that I've had to to look at and grieve over is that how rigid and strict I was in so many ways with my kids, and I can't go back and undo and redo that, but I was going by the book, and I was going to give them everything I didn't get. So we have to grieve those things. And another thing is a marriage or a relationship that really never worked. Maybe you never had it. Maybe you never had a relationship. Maybe you never had a marriage. That has to be grieved. Grieve it. Because if we dreamed of maybe having a marriage, maybe you married in several times and didn't have a happy marriage. That's a dream. Grieve it. And then a childhood that looked really normal from the outside. But on the inside, that there was chaos, or, and it felt empty on the inside. And I think that's a lot of ways that I did. I mean, I'm the one that did this. I made us look good. I made us look good out in the community. Because I didn't have that in childhood, so we try to do the reverse. And I'll tell you what, we had a good-looking family, and my kids were all popular. They were all in sports. They were, stars and everything. But there was an emptiness inside the house that I couldn't fulfill, or my husband couldn't, because we were both adult children of alcoholics. You can't pass on anything you don't have. And then another thing that we have to grieve is the visions of ourselves that we, or the vision of ourselves that we thought we would be in this time of our life. People that are in their middle years, I'm way past those middle years. But, between a lot of times people will have big dreams of what they want their life to look like. And maybe they work hard in their 20s, early 20s, late 20s, early 30s, hit about 35 or so and realize that all those dreams are not going to come true, that it's not going to happen. And so it's about grieving what's not, those dreams. And, sometimes it's about having another dream, recreate another dream, create something that is possible to achieve. Because the thing that we do, a lot of as addicts, I'm only speaking for myself, but I know a lot of addicts. So many of us are so grandiose in our thinking, that we want big, we dream big, we want this, we want that, blah, blah, blah. And then we have to grieve the reality of And then we don't have to settle, but we have to make friends with how our life is, and that we're not going to have, we have to grieve not having that happy family that we wanted that happy family to come out of, and then we wanted to create a happy family, and then we have to grieve that because we are breathing normal human beings, and things are not going to be perfect. There's no perfection. And then we get into that perfect recovery. Any of y'all gotten into wanting that perfect recovery? Shake your head if you have. Perfect recovery, if you wanted perfect recovery. And that's a fantasy. That is a fantasy because we are human beings, and we're not going to, we're not going to do recovery perfect at all whatsoever. If you set yourself up to think that you're not going to ever, now I'm not talking about, alcoholics and drug addicts, relapsing. But that's what they do if they build themselves up so much. I've seen this over and over and over and over in the field of alcoholism and drug addiction, where people go through treatment, they get on that pink cloud, they get so excited about treatment and about, they're clean and sober, and they're going to go out in the world and they're going to do this and that and something else. And they do. They can maybe go out there and try to make up for the times that they, wasn't making progress. And what they do, the first thing they do, they quit going to meetings. They give up, calling a sponsor because they got it in treatment. No one's going to get sobriety in treatment. What you're going to get in treatment is you're going to get dried out, you're going to get sober, and then you're going to get some tools. But that is not recovery. Recovery takes, and I believe in treatment, or I wouldn't be in the treatment business. That jump starts you. But I have seen a lot of, particularly alcoholics and drug addicts, thinking they've got it because they feel so much better at the end of treatment. And they're going to go out and they're going to build a business, and they're going to do this and they're going to do that and they're going to do something else. And then they get in overwhelm. And the next thing you do, I'd walk down that hall down into detox, they'd be back into detox because when you give up taking care of yourself, I don't care what kind of an addict you are, whether you're a work addict, have an eating disorder, you go down the line. If we don't treat the addiction, we relapse. And once we relapse, we, it's like all that recovery that maybe we've had, we don't go back to, we go back to the starting place. We go back to where we were, mentally and emotionally when we relapse. So it is vital for people, to, because I'm talking to addicts, is that give up wanting perfect recovery. You're not going to have perfect recovery, but what we must have is perfect abstinence. Now, it's a little tricky with eating disorder clients, and what is a relapse with a drug addict and an alcoholic is one drink, one drug, and you're in relapse. Is that true? Shake your head if you think that's true. One drink, one drug, you're in relapse. With the food, it's a different deal. It's a different deal. And, this is why, with the food piece, we need sponsors. We need to surround ourselves with people who will keep us honest, because what we do is we get on a path, a recovery path, and we start out with a food plan. And I have seen many people, particularly your anorexics and your bulimics, they can recover, but they stay on that original food plan. They never get off of that original food plan. That becomes the God of their understanding. But if you're compulsive overeaters, what relapse looks like is people with food addiction and eating disorders, they can take little side roads. Now, I'm not recommending that you do this, but you're at a function. You haven't had one bite of sugar for months, and they served a dessert. And maybe you decided to eat the dessert, or maybe you decided to eat a half of the dessert. What you did, you took a little side road. You just kind of slipped off of course. And recovery for a food addict is to get right back on course the next meal. Don't beat yourself up, because what usually happens is, if people mess up with their food, then they go all the way down. Well, I've already messed up. I might as well just go whole hog or nothing, and then I'll start over Monday morning or after Christmas or after my daughter's wedding, whatever. So a disease has to be treated on a daily basis. And so the process of grieving is one thing, is acknowledging the truth, stop minimizing or excusing or explaining it away. For instance, if you've got an unresolved, for instance, and there's lots of different ways to look at this, but let's say you started out, you were going to college, but you went to work instead. And then you got very successful in the work that you were doing. And then you look back and you didn't go to school, but you became successful. And I've worked with people like this. I have a son like this. Now, he does not regret, not finishing college, because many of his college friends that, graduated with honors are, have not been very successful. But whatever the deal is, some people will grieve not finishing school or not. And so what you do in that case, if you're grieving that so much that it really bothers you, go back to school. I mean, I don't care how old you are, go back to school, take some classes. But acknowledge, the truth and stop minimizing it. Because when we minimize things that we need to grieve over, when we don't do the grieving, the loss, grieving the loss, I'll tell you and even I was going to have a disclaimer about the grief. I was just going to tell you why, that it wasn't the biggest thing. But one of the biggest griefs that I ever had, it took me 2 years to get over it. And that was that we had this big old 2-story house that my husband and I, for 13 years, restored and remodeled that house. I mean, while working, while raising a house full of kids, and I mean, bless his heart, he'd come in from work and he'd eat about a supper and go to work, and both of us would work to 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Not every night, but most nights. And so we put our heart and soul in that house. And then the kids had all gone. We had this big old house, no kids at home, nothing. And so I was out of town working, and I got a call from my husband, and he said that there's a church, a Catholic church, that is wanting to buy our property, because we had property in front of the house, some acreage. They want to buy that acreage to put a church, and they want to buy our house. And I just said, absolutely not. That is our house. That's my house. No, I'm not going to sell. I mean, by that time I was screaming at the top of my lungs, I'm sure, because I had so much wrapped up in that house. It was much more than a house. It was the house. That's where we raised the kids. That's where, we both got sober. That's where we got, there was a lot of memories there. And by gosh, I wasn't going to sell that house. And he very seldom in our marriage made a decision that I didn't agree with. But by the time I got home, he had made the decision he was going to sell the house. And after I beat him up, no, I didn't beat him up, but I had to really, I thought I was grieving losing the house. And we had some land. There's the Fairway Oaks Country Club addition that was across the road from us, because when we moved out here, we were in the country, and then the town moved toward us. So we had some land over there. And so, he promised me this big new house. I didn't want no big new house. I wanted my old house. But we got a new house in Fairway Oaks. And then the day that we moved out, I had a sponsoree that I just started sponsoring, and several of my sponsorees had come out, and my husband's sponsors and, people in the program came out to help us move. And she was, I left with the first load of furniture because I couldn't stand being in the house. I mean, the grief was overpowering me. And so I cried all the way over, which was a half a mile over to the new house. And, it was a wonderful new house, and I was crying. And so this little sponsoree said, well, I see that you're upset. And I said, well, I thought I had grieved selling the house. And she gave me some good information. She said, I didn't think we could grieve anything until we actually lost it. I said, yeah, you're right. I mean, I had thought I had grieved it, but I didn't grieve it until I could feel the loss of it. And I want to tell you what happened in that house. Nuns lived there for many, many years. And then, I don't know what happened, but one day we went by there, and they tore that house completely down, and now it's a parking lot. Nothing there. And so that's a material thing. And I didn't even grieve it. I mean, this has been, 30, 40 years afterwards. But anyway, grieve those things. Grieve them and let them go. It took me 2 years to grieve losing that house. And that's you would have thought that it was a death. And it was a death of an era is what it was. So one of the things in the process of grieving is note the losses, write down the losses of what you have and name the losses. Is it safety? Did you, were you raised in a home where you wasn't kept safe? Was it a loss of your innocence? Maybe you were sexually abused as a child, or touched inappropriately, and not, you don't discount any of that, but loss of innocence, that needs to be grieved. And then belonging, if you ever, and I've worked with so many addicts that we all belong to the same club of, I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. Have y'all ever felt that? I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I was always on the outside looking in. So grieve that feeling of belonging or not belonging. And then grieve not being validated. Children need to be validated. Adults need to be validated. I'm seeing my friend Joseph there, and I really want to validate you, Joseph, about your parenting. I mean, he runs a business, and I see his business. He's in the roofing business in the Metroplex. Hardworking man, has a good crew, and he keeps that baby sometimes, and that little toddler will be running around, and without saying anything about Joseph's past, what you've done is you grieved what you didn't get, and now you are able to give it to your daughter, and that's what recovery is, But we can't give what we didn't receive until we acknowledge it, until we really acknowledge it. And so we have to feel the emotions, and that sadness and anger and confusion and regret and even relief. Sometimes it's a relief, like that house. It was really, in the long run, was a relief because it was a lot to keep up. And So, one of the things in grieving what you didn't get, sometimes it's like once you, maybe you had a dream of, wanting to go into business, or maybe you had a dream, I don't know what your dream is, but maybe you had a dream that never became came about. And except one thing, particularly if it's anything that's happened in your past as a child, except that it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault, and that you can't rewrite the past. Release the fantasy so you can live in reality, not resentment or confusion. I see a lot of people, and I lived in that fantasy for many years of what my life could be like, or what I could do, or da da da. You have to, it's good to have dreams and goals, but if you get way over there into the future, that dream, that goal turns into fantasy. It's a fantasy, and you can miss your life by living in a fantasy. Or you can live in the past, and die of disappointment. If you don't grieve what you think you should have done or have gotten, or what, if you don't grieve that unresolved dream or goal that you had, it will turn into resentment or an illusion. We just make up all sorts of things to get upset over. And so one of the things is replace the old stories with truth, compassion, and new choices. One of the things, I just had I had all kinds of dreams of what my life was going to look like. And you know what? It has turned out much better than anything I could ever dream. I mean, I didn't dream up owning a business. I didn't dream, I didn't dream up, having wonderful kids. I mean, I didn't dream some of the things that I did dream, thank God, did not come true. Thank you, God, that they didn't come true. So, always go back to the steps then when there's, a problem. And if you have a dream, if you live in a fantasy of something that was never meant to be, give it up. Give it up. And how you do that is step one. We admit we are powerless. We're powerless over whatever that unresolved or unmet dream that's rolling around in your head that never came to pass. Do a good first step on it. What is the problem here? And we admit we're powerless over, and I'm allowing it to make my life unmanageable. And so, and then, two is turned over to is knowing that there is a God of our understanding. And then three is being willing to turn this over to the God of your own understanding. And what that means is those unresolved, those unfulfilled dreams, that you had, it's fantasy, folks. It is fantasy. And it keeps you from living, or keeps any of us from living in the moment. It's always about going back to the moment, but it is about grieving it and letting it go. And to look honestly, step three is making a decision. Do you want to stay in that place of bless my heart, this didn't happen, that didn't happen, I'm not. I'll tell you, if you want to have a dream come true, you've got to put action to your dreams. They're not going to come to you. You have to put action. And sometimes you put action to them, and then it still doesn't happen. So it's about grieving those things. And that's what step three is inviting God in and making a decision. Do you want to stay in the problem, or do you want to go into the solution? It is so simple, the 12 steps. You just make a decision. Do you want to stay miserable, or do you want to, it's like this. You're at a crossroads. Do you want to stay miserable in a dream that didn't come true, or do you want to go toward recovery and look at why it's necessary for you to stay in that fantasy of the past? Maybe, you didn't marry the person that you really wanted to, and that happens. They went and married somebody else, and you've always felt like you've settled. You might be married to somebody for 30 years and still feeling like you settled because the one that you wanted got away. So, look at those things and make a decision. Had you rather stay miserable in the problem, or do you want to go toward recovery? If you want to go toward recovery, then do an inventory. Go right into step 4, inventory these lost dreams that you feel like that never came to pass. Look at it. And honestly, when you look at your history, you might decide it was something that you wouldn't even want today. We get a great dream going in early adult life or childhood and hang on to that thing and miss what we really do have in the present time. So, do a good inventory. That's what step 4 is. And honestly, look at it. And then, see what character defect is rearing its ugly head in 6 and 7. And then 8 and 9, make peace with it. And how you make peace with it is sometimes it's not about making peace with another person. It's not about making amends to another person. It's about making peace with ourselves and making amends to ourselves. Bless my heart, I have regretted all of my life that I didn't do blank, 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 blank. And if you have something to fill in that blank, 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 that's what you're grieving. That's what you need to look at letting go of. And then, that's 8 and 9, make amends to yourself for that. A lot of the 12 steps is directed at us, and letting ourselves off the hook. Yes, we have to deal with others, but a lot of it is directed at us and letting ourselves, like I said, off the hook. And then, step 11, if you have lost conscious contact with God, we made conscious contact with God the first time in step 3, and through, your life or your days or your months or whatever, if you feel like you've disconnected with God, do a good 11th step. Look at step 11 and reconnect with a power greater than yourself. If you want to know what the answer is, that's it, and we know that. And then if you really want to get past yourself, do a good 12 step and go do something for someone else. So the healing truth is you can't grieve something you still believe that might happen. You can't grieve something that you still believe might happen. Like if you've had this, and a lot of the dreams that we have are fantasies. But if you are still dreaming about someday, I'm going to blah, 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 someday. My friend Bob is here, and his wife was here a few minutes ago. Bob is a travel agency out of California, and he's like a regular travel agency, and then he also does sober cruises. And I'm saying that we're doing one in January, so I'm going to plug our January the 9th cruise to Cabo. And but my point is, a lot of people dream about going on a cruise. They dream about it. They'll see ads in a magazine. They will see something on TV, and they dream and dream about going on a cruise, but they never take the steps to put footwork to their dreams. And so they miss it. They miss. And, one of the things is if you want to have a dream come true, like if you want to go on a cruise, is start saving a little money along, but do it consistently. And all of a sudden, A couple of years later, you'll have money to go on a cruise. So if it's real important to you, make those dreams come true. And if it's not, grieve it and let it go. And so grief doesn't mean weakness. It means you're finally feeling the truth. One of the things that I had to, and I haven't talked about this much, but anyway, all right, I'll talk about it. I had to grieve my first husband. And, you know, he was a good-looking son of a gun. He looked like Clint Eastwood, and I could hardly go to Clint Eastwood movies because he looked like my first husband. And he was a sorry son of a gun. I mean, he was not a good man. But I had to grieve him not, I mean, and it's hard for me to say this, I can't believe he didn't want me, but he's the one that left me. I was a teenager. I had a baby and he left. And I had to grieve that, but I stayed so mad and so angry. I'll tell you, I got a lot of real productive in my life. You know, anger, if you can turn that anger into action, you can accomplish a lot. And I accomplished a lot in the name of that SOB to show him. And he didn't even know what I was doing, you know. And I'll tell you this little secret. When I was first go around of working the steps, I was in Al-Anon. I had lost 100 pounds, you know, because I had gained all this weight. And anyway, I'd always been overweight, but I'd lost about 100 pounds. The oil business was good. My husband had bought me a white Lincoln Continental. We were living good. He bought me a white cashmere coat with a white fox collar and with this dark hair, and I was slim. I mean, I was looking pretty good, you know. So my plan was, this man went into hiding because my father was going to kill him. He missed and shot his left arm off. He didn't completely kill him, but he did shoot his left arm off. I mean, it is a horrible story, but anyway, I found a way. This was way before internet, but I found a way. I found out where he was. He was in Oklahoma. And I was going to drive up to his house one day, or where he worked. I thought maybe that might be more impactful to go where he worked. And I was going to have that white Lincoln Continental out front, and I was going to have that white, you know, cashmere coat on, and with the white fox collar. But I had enough program in me. I knew that I needed to check that out with my sponsor. And so I went and talked to my sponsor about it, and she said, have you lost your ever-loving mind? Have you lost your mind? That man deserted you. He deserted you, and he deserted your baby. And anyway, that's why we have to have good sponsors that will tell the truth. And she cussed like a sailor. And I'm being nice about what she said. I mean, she cussed and called him every name in the book and called me the B word, and to just even think that I was going to go do that. So, but that is a fantasy, and I had not grieved. I had to grieve that fantasy of, you know, one day that man would want me. That's the fantasy of a teenager, really. So, so the gift of grieving was never in the ability to receive. It's in the ability to create. It's about creating our reality. We have the ability to create with God's help. If you want to have a dream come true, you're going to have to put some action to it. That's what that means. If you want to have a dream come true, or if it is an illusion, and it's just a fantasy, grieve it and let it go. Where's my big book? Did you get it for me? Huh?
I'll grab it.
It's in that bag out there. Well, I was going to read you something, but never mind. Y'all can read this. Read in, it used to be on the big book on page 442, but since we have a new big book out, Bob could tell us probably what the page number is. But if you really want to know about how to have peace of mind and grieve what really never was meant to be. If you want to really grieve and let go of what never was, read the passage like I said, it used to be page 449 on acceptance. And what it says is acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. It's a whole paragraph. So that's what I have. Do you know what I'm talking about on page 449? Have y'all read it? Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Page 449. All right. So acceptance is the answer to all of my problems today. Acceptance. And if you have a fantasy of a dream that never came true, accept that it was never meant to be. So this comes out of, and I'm not going to read all of it because I want y'all to talk, but it comes out of the doctor, the addict, the alcoholic, and they don't even call it that now. Anyway, I'm not going to read it because it's too long, but y'all can find it and read it. Acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. So that's what I have. It's, an affirmation is it's okay to grieve what I didn't get. Grieve that promotion you didn't get. It's probably too much work anyway. Grieve those things, the losses, and just honor yourself for, being willing to grieve what never was meant to be, because we're wasting our time by keeping that dream alive when it was never meant to be in the first place. So who wants to share? Do y'all know what I'm talking about grieving what never was? Who wants to?